Hey everybody, Matt from 90th percentile.ca here. For access to more study notes, practice questions, mock exams, and end of chapter question videos, visit 90th percentile.ca and sign up for your free trial today. Link below in the description. Okay, so this is the most important module from the equity section. This is really what's most likely to be on the exam from a quantitative standpoint. There is some qualitative analysis we can do in this module as well, but really some of the formulas and concepts here are the most important and are what's most likely to be on exam day. So we're going to make sure we take our time with it and really understand it. We're going to talk about the key two ways of valuing equities. So these are present value models and multiple models. So under present value models, it's kind of the same concept across all of them, but the inputs are a little bit different. But all we're doing is we're taking some sort of cash flow, whether it's dividends, free cash flow to the firm, free cash flow to equity, whatever, and we're forecasting those into the future and then discounting them back to today. So we're going to go over, like I said, DDM or dividend discount models. So we can look at a single stage dividend discount model where we just have one growth rate. We have a multi-stage dividend discount model where we have a couple growth rates. And then we'll also look at the Gordon growth model, which is incorporated into both of these. And then we'll also be discussing DCFs or discounted cash flow analysis, which are, like I said, same concept as a dividend discount model, but here what we're doing is we're using different inputs. So we're using free cash flow to the firm and free cash flow to equity, forecasting those out, discounting them back to today, and coming up with the present value of either enterprise value in the case of free cash flow to the firm or equity value in the case of free cash flow to equity. So the dividend discount model will automatically give you a value of the stock price or price per share. Whereas here in these two models, you can still get to the stock price, but there's just some extra steps involved given that the output, like I said, is enterprise value. And then here it's the total equity value, not like equity value per share. But we'll go over that and clear those up. We'll also talk about multiples, which are less, require less calculations, obviously. Whole idea around the multiple analysis is that you take a certain company and you gather some similar comparable companies and look at their valuations and maybe use like an average or median of the competitors' valuations to determine a fair price for company you're looking at. So that'll be commonly done with PE or price to earnings ratio, PB or price to book value of equity ratios, or price to cash flow ratios. Some of these ratios are more relevant in some industries than others, but we'll go over that as well. And we also have EV to EBITDA multiples, which same kind of concept, same approach, but the difference here with these, like free cash flow to equity, you're going to get a value, you're valuing equity here, whereas here you're valuing enterprise value. So we can work both ways to, like get equity value from here or enterprise value from here. We just got to add some debt and subtract cash, depending on which way you're going. But like I said, we'll go over it. Take our time on it. This is a really important concept, so I want to make sure everyone understands.
An analyst estimates the intrinsic value of stock to be in the range of 1785 to 2145. Once again, intrinsic value it's not a defined value, right? It depends on the assumptions of the person looking at the stock, uh, you know, their expectations for future growth rates, profitability, all of that. So 1785 to 21, and the current market price is 24.35. So according to this analyst, the stock is overvalued because right now it's trading at above what they believe the value should be. So if they want to profit, they would short the stock, buy puts, all that. Next, an analyst determines the intrinsic value of an equity security to be 55. Um, this is, kind of a side note, but whenever an analyst gives you like a single value for a price target, it's like, okay, like how accurate is your modeling? In practice, like especially for private equity, you usually see more of a range of intrinsic values. I mean, for public equities, you do see this a lot, especially in equity research reports. But you kind of take it with a grain of salt, right? Like, is it exactly 55, not 5501? See what I'm getting at? So Just keep that in the back of your mind. But anyway, we're saying it's worth 55 and the current price is 47, so it's undervalued. So we believe it should go up to the 55. Which of the following is most likely used in a present value model? Um, Basically, a present value model. We can kind of see the three most common models down here in the next question. We'll get to it this question in a second, but to give a quick overview on these different models. So a present value model basically takes it's like a discounted cash flow analysis, right? So a discounted cash flow analysis or a DCF is an example of this, where you would take yearly cash flows, so like year one, year two, year three, you model them out. So you would apply like some, Excel modeling to come up with like revenue, say it's like 1,000, and then 1,200, and then 1,400, and then you work your way down the income statement to get to free cash flow. And then, so let's say free cash flow is like 500, 600, 700. Then you would take these free cash flows and discount them back to today to calculate the value of the firm. So that's basically how a present value model works. Of course, it's more detailed than that, but that's the general idea. So which of these is most likely to be used in a model like this? Is it enterprise value? No, because that's what we're trying to calculate, right? Like we discount all of these back and then calculate enterprise value and equity value. So this is an output of a present value model. Price to free cash flow. Once again, this is an output. So price to free cash flow is like the share price or equity value divided by free cash flow. Um, Whereas here, yeah, free cash flow to equity is exactly what you would use. So in this example here, I just said free cash flow, but it could be free cash flow to the firm or free cash flow to equity. And if you discount the free cash flow to the firm back to today, you're going to get a value estimate of the enterprise value. Whereas if you discount free cash flow to equity back to today, you get an estimate of the equity value. And of course, either way, um, there's kind of different steps involved, right? So even if you do free cash flow to equity and you come up with an enterprise value, let's say here you have your enterprise value, well, then you can make the adjustments um, to like debt and cash. So you would like subtract debt, add cash, and you would calculate your equity value because that's the relationship between enterprise value and equity value. Um, so in this case, free cash flow to the firm, you would start here, but for equity value, you would start here, and then if you wanted to, you could work your way back up. It's the same kind of thing. It's just the calculations here for the free cash flow are a little bit different. So moving our way down, so book value is least likely to be considered when using a multiplier model, an asset-based valuation model, a present value model. So present value model, like we said, book value to equity. No, we're not worried about that. We're calculating market value. Um, Multiplier models, put really simply, are when you take, let's say, we're using an example of book value here. So we can do like price to book value. And you come up with a list of companies. Let's say like company A, B, C, D. These are all comparable companies for the company that you're analyzing. And we say the price to book value for here is like 1.0, 2.5, 1.75, 3.0. And then we can calculate an average or look at the median, or there's some judgment involved to come up with the average for the industry. So let's say it's, I don't know, 2.25. That's not the actual number, but let's just say the average from what we calculated from the comparable companies is 2.25. So then we're saying that the company should trade at 2.25 price to book value. Um, Price to book value is mainly used more for financial companies, but for most other industries, you would be using an EV to EBITDA multiple, which takes the same steps. You're just looking at a different multiple here. And then asset-based valuation is, you're basically just looking at the value of the firm's assets minus its liabilities and its equity as well. So in this case, you would need to incorporate the book value of equity into it to find your net asset value. So, oh, sorry, this is actually, I crossed it out, but this is the answer. With respect to present value models, which of the following statements is most accurate? A, present value models can be used only if a stock pays a dividend. Nope. So to kind of elaborate on what I was talking about a bit earlier with the present value and the DCF, we can use different measures that were like different cash flow measures that were discounting back. So we could look at like free cash flow to the firm, like I said, free cash flow to equity. We can look at dividends. Like we can use all of these to discount them back to today to calculate the present value of the company. Um, the thing about present value models is, like I said, you can use these measures, or you can also use a dividend discount model, which is the same. It takes the exact same steps pretty much, but here you're just using dividends as the cash flow you're discounting back. So with that, we can go back to the question. So what's most accurate? Present value models can only be used if a stock pays a dividend or is expected to pay a dividend. No. Present value models can be used for stocks that currently pay a dividend, are expected to pay a dividend, or are not expected to pay a dividend. Yep. All we need is some measure of cash flow. So dividends, free cash flow, whatever, EBITDA, whatever. The one caveat being that for present value models, you're going to need some sort of cash flow measures to be positive. So if you're, if it's like a startup company that has no free cash flow, no dividends, no nothing, and it's all negative, then how are you going to discount that back to today? It doesn't make any sense. So in that case, you would use a multiple analysis. Um, Even for companies that have like negative EBITDA, especially startups, they'll typically trade off of a revenue multiple. So like these high growth tech startups, they usually just trade at like two, three, four times revenue, maybe even sometimes 10 times. Like the valuation's been kind of crazy. But you're gonna need some sort of positive measure in order to accurately value it, because like if you're discounting negative free cash flows back to today, like it just the interpretation doesn't make any sense. A Canadian life insurance company had an issue of 4.8%, $25 par value, perpetual, non-convertible, non-callable preferred shares outstanding. So there's a bunch of stuff going on. Here, they're just trying to throw you off once again. The required rate of return on similar issues is 4.49%. The intrinsic value of the preferred shares closest to what? So we went over this previously. Believe in the time, yeah, in the time value of money, where the value of a perpetual stream of cash flows, which is the case in a preferred share, is just the cash flow um, divided by the required rate of return, right? So what do we have? We have 4.8%, $25 par value. So the dividend we're paying is 4.8% of the par value, 25, which is $1.20. So this is the cash flow that we're receiving forever. And it's yeah, it doesn't say if it's annual or whatever, but you're just gonna have to assume it's annual because we have the required rate of return of 4.49%. This dividend is 4.8%. There's no mention of like weekly, quarterly, compound, anything like that. So just assume it's annual. So we got 120 over 4.49%. It's the required rate of return. And we get 26.73. So that's the market value of the share, which is, yeah, I guess close enough to this answer here, 26.75. The Beasley Corp has just paid a dividend of $1.75 per share. If the required rate of return is 12.3% per year and dividends are expected to grow indefinitely at a constant rate of 9.2% a year, the intrinsic value of the stock is closest to what? So, um, I mean, even just looking at this, you can cross this one off. Like it's so widely off. Like, there's an element of gamesmanship involved in this exam as well. Um, you can kind of think like, they're not trying to make your life easy, right? So just by looking at the answers, look how much lower this one is than these two. Um, there's going to be something you mess up in the calc here that'll either give you the correct answer or the wrong answer, which are really close. I mean, it's not like 100% sure that this is going to be wrong, but if I was in a rush on the exam and I didn't have time, I would cross this one out and circle one of these 50-50 chance, call it a day. But anyway, we have this question here. We have dividends growing at a certain rate every year. And first thing we have to do is recognize that this is a dividend discount model that has to be valued using Gordon growth model. And the formula is that the value of the share today is equal to the most recent dividend, so dividend times 0, times 1 plus the growth rate of the dividend, divided by the required rate of return, subtract the growth rate. And I touched on this. I touched on this in the time value of money module when we were talking perpetual preferred shares. But in case you were wondering how this formula is derived, um, basically we're assuming that this dividend of 1.75 grows at the 9.2% forever, right? So we have 1.75. The next year, I'm just gonna kind of wing the numbers to say it's like $2, and then like 2.30, and then like 2.60, and this goes on forever, right? So you can discount every one of these cash flows back to today to calculate the value, like to infinity, effectively, right? Because we're assuming that this goes on forever. So once you get to like year 200 of this, the cash flow that you're discounting back, even if it's like $7, you're discounting it back 100 years at 12.3%. So this is it's gonna be like nothing. It's gonna add pretty much no value to the value of the stock. It might be like 0.01 in present value. You know what I mean? So as this goes out to infinity, instead of discounting all these cash flows back to today, the formula simplifies into this. So that's how these formulas are derived when we're taking cash flows into to infinity, effectively. So anyway, we can calculate the value here. Dividend 0, so we just paid a dividend of $1.75 times 1 plus the growth rate of the dividend, 9.2%, divided by the required rate of return, so 12.3% minus 9.2%. And if we run this out, we get a value of 6165. So that's our answer C. The Gordon growth model, which we just talked about, can be used to value dividend paying companies that are A, expected to grow very fast, B, in a mature phase of growth, or C, very sensitive to the business cycle. So inherent in the formula that we just looked at is that the growth rate is constant, right? So we had what, 9.2% growth rate forever. So we have constant growth assumed in the model, then it's going to be more appropriate for valuing mature companies. If you have a company that's expected to grow really fast, you would use like a multi-stage dividend discount model. Typically on the exam, you'll see 2 stages. You wouldn't really see 3 stages. Even in practice, people don't really do that. Like it's just more assumptions. But you might have a dividend growing 5% for like 3 years, and then 2% assumed forever. So we'll get into some questions about that, and we'll show you how the valuation. It's the same concept, but the formula is a bit different. Um, but yeah, for Gordon growth, we're just using the one constant rate forever, so we can't really use this to value like a high growth startup tech stock. Okay, so here we have a multi-stage dividend discount model, which I was talking about. So analyst gathers all this info. We have the current share price, current annual dividend, so dividend as a time 0, dividend growth rate for years 1 to 4, and then growth rate for years 5 onwards. Typically, yeah, you would see exactly this where we have a higher growth phase in the early years, and then in perpetuity, you would see a slower growth rate. If you assume a company's going to grow at 9% forever, um, you're going to get questioned on that. Like, no companies are assumed to grow at 9% forever. Not many anyway, or they shouldn't be, but it is what it is. Required rate of return 12%, and we're asked on a dividend discount model. The stock is most likely undervalued, fairly valued, overvalued, and we got it. So basically, we got to calculate the value of the stock and then compare it to this 2256. So basically, the way this works is we got to discount back. Like, there's not really a quick way around it for this one. We just kind of got to discount the year 1 to 4 cash flows back to today. And then in perpetuity, there's a little bit of a different formula. Um, Whereas like these year 1 to 4, we're discounting back single cash flows. In year 5, we actually use um, the dividend or the Gordon growth model, right? So this would be D0 1 plus G. So this is the perpetual growth rate over R plus G. So we'll get to that in a second. But for now, we're going to do calculate our dividend. So 160 times what, 9% or 1.09. And we get 1.744. And then this 1.744 times 9%, or growing at 9% is 1.901. And then we get 2.072. And then we get 2.259. So now we have to discount all of these back to today using the 12% required rate of return. So it would basically be, we can do it up here, 1.744 over, just discounting it for 1 year, right? So 1.12, and that's 1.557 for two. What do we got? 2.072 over 1.12 squared because we discounted 2 years. Or sorry, see, you gotta be a little bit careful with the timelines here. If you caught that, that's good. So year two, we're actually the 1.901 over 1.12 squared, and that discounts it. We get a value of 1.515. You'll notice that the present value of this is actually less than here because the discount rate is higher than the growth rate. But anyway, um, 1.515. I'm just going to write the rest of these for year three and year four down because I'm sure you get the concept. Basically, you just discount this at 3 years, discount this for 4 years. So this is going to be 1.475, and then this one is 1.436. Okay, great. So if we summed up all of this, it would be the present value of the stock as of time zero, but just including these 4 years of dividends. So like if the company went bankrupt afterwards, this would be the value of the stock. But we're assuming it's growing its dividend at 4% annually forever, right?
And then to calculate the value or the terminal value, this here is called the terminal value. So it's the value of the stock associated with this perpetual cash flows or growth rate. So here, what we need to do is take the dividend as of time 5. So it would be this 2.259. So let's do it over here. So value in time 5. It's going to be the 2.259 times the growth rate. But now we're not using the 9%, we're using the 4% because this is the assumed growth rate for years 5 onwards. So times 1.04 divided by R is still the same, so 12%. Subtract this growth rate as well, so 4%. So when we run this, what we get is a value of 29.363. Okay. But this isn't the value as of year 5. This is actually the value as of year 4. Because kind of similar to when we did the single staged Gordon growth model, like we're taking the dividend as of time 0, adding a growth rate, and then when you discount it, it discounts it back a year, right? So I guess we have the D0 here, but this would actually be D4 in this case, times 1 plus G, which is effectively the dividend in year 5, right? And then you run this formula and it discounts it back to year 4. So to finish off this valuation, we actually have to discount this 29,363 terminal value back to today. So if we do this, it would be the 29,363 over 1.12 power 4, because 4 years, right? And we get a value of 18,661. So kind of messy. There's a lot of steps here. I hope the visual helped. But to sum everything up and get the value of the stock, it would be the sum of these present values and the 18,661 that we just calculated. So if we do that, we get a value of 2.64. This is the value of the stock according to our model that we just ran. And if we look at this, the 22.56 current price, we are asked if it's undervalued, fairly valued, or overvalued. And in this case, the stock is undervalued because the current price of 22.56 is less than the price that we estimated. The best model to use when valuing a young dividend paying company that has just entered the growth phase is most likely to be not going to be the golden growth for sure because that's a constant growth rate. Kind of a toss up between the two-stage and the three-stage dividend discount model. But because it's a young dividend paying company that just entered the growth phase, I would argue three-stage dividend discount model. Like I said, in practice, rarely will you see like three separate growth rates for revenue. Um, it's just going to raise a lot of questions, but I mean, in this case, it might be the most appropriate. It's up to the analyst's judgment at the end of the day. An analyst makes the following statement: the use of PE and other multiples for analysis is not effective because the multiples are based on historical data and because not all companies have positive accounting earnings. So the analyst statement is most likely inaccurate with respect to both historical data and earnings. Yeah, this is the answer. PE multiples don't have to use, or multiples in general don't have to use historical data. You might see like, let's say we're in 2023 right now. We might see something like a 2024 PE multiple, which is called a forward multiple. And the only difference between these two is that in the 2023 one, you would have current price over 2023 earnings, while in the next one, you'd have price over 2024 earnings. So we don't have to use historical data. When valuations were going really crazy, we were seeing people trade at like, or companies trade at like 10 times 3 years forward or revenue or something. Like it got pretty ridiculous. But generally, either like the current year or 1 year forward are used in multiple analysis. And then regarding the positive accounting earnings, sure, some companies might have negative accounting earnings, but we're saying the use of PE and other multiples. So even if they have negative earnings, they could have positive free cash flow, or they could have positive EBITDA or something like that. So this statement isn't relevant. An analyst gathers the following information about similar companies in the banking sector. So we have First Bank, Prime Bank, Pioneer Trust. Which of the companies is most likely to be undervalued? So we have these multiples here, price to book value and price to earnings. So whichever company has the lowest multiples relative to the competitors is going to be, like subjectively determined to be undervalued. Of course, there's more components to it, but just based on this, that's how you would get the answer. So price to book value, First Bank is the highest, so we're going to scratch this one out. Overvalued from this perspective, and even looking at PE, it's like in line. It's in the middle of the other two, so it's definitely not undervalued. Prime Bank, we have the same PB as Pioneer, but then a higher PE, so I'll cross this one out as well. So we're left with Pioneer, which has it's tied for the lowest price to book, and it has the lowest PE, so Pioneer is undervalued. An analyst has determined that the appropriate EV/EBITDA for a rainbow company is 10.2, so this is the EV/EBITDA multiple. The analyst has also collected the following forecasting information. So EBITDA of 22 mil, market value of debt of 56 mil, and cash of 1.5 mil. The value of equity for Rainbow Corp is or Rainbow Company is closest to what? So first thing we do is we use this EV/EBITDA multiple to calculate the EV, right? So EV is equal to the 22 mil EBITDA times our 10.2 valuation multiple, and this gives us our enterprise value, right? So we got 224.4 mil. This is our enterprise value. So this is the value of the entire firm, accounting for its debt and its cash on hand and its preferred shares and all that. But if you want to make our way down to equity, we're going to need to adjust for debt and cash, right? Like enterprise value is typically used or is typically looked at when dealing with acquisitions. Because if you're buying a company, They could have like an equity value of 10 mil, but then also have 10 mil of debt. So you don't just pay the 10 mil, you're gonna have to pay for both the equity and the debt. So 20 mil total, which is your enterprise value, right? Like you have to assume the debt when you buy these companies. You can't like it doesn't just come out of nowhere. So to make our way down from this enterprise value, we have to subtract debt and add back cash because it's assumed that like this cash can be just used uh, to offset some of the debt that you're assuming. So we have the negative 224.4, and we're going to subtract 56. And it's important that we're using the market value of debt. That's important as well, not book value. Market value is a more accurate measure, more up-to-date measure. And then we're adding the 1.5 of cash. So here we get an equity value of 169.9 mil, which is our answer A. Um, you could also like if they gave the share number of shares outstanding, you could divide this equity value by like 100 million shares or whatever, and then you would get your per share stock price, but that's not relevant for this question.